is Justin Nurse, and this is the Laugh It Off Media Centre. In tonight's main news, we go direct to a live crossing with Heather Ford from the Creative Commons. Heather, can you hear me? Yeah. Heather? Yeah. Great. And how's it going there, Heather? Fantastic. Larry, having a good time? Go, you good thing. Go. Great, guys. And I just wanted to send a shout out to you and obviously all the troops out there to Creative Commons. Just keep remembering to share, reuse, and remix. Sharing is caring. Some rights reserved. My right to say right on. Right on. Move along, people. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see. Move along.
So I wanted to start by saying thank you so much to UWC for continuing the amazing work that it's been doing in the world of free culture and free and open source software. I think it was 2 years ago that I was here. Derek Keats organized the first African open source meeting, and it's really amazing to see how much it's grown, this idea, in South Africa. This is also kind of an interesting time for me because in 2005, this grandpa first came to South Africa. This is his second time. He's come with his family, which is great. But it's his second time in South Africa. In 2005, he came to Johannesburg to launch Creative Commons South Africa at a conference called Common Sense, which tried to start building an African community of people involved in free software and free culture in and around the continents. Before that time and after that time, myself and the very small team at Creative Commons, which was basically Andrew Renz, who's sitting here today, and myself, went around South Africa, and we felt a bit like Bible salespeople. Here we were telling people that they should use a license that said to people that they should copy. That rather than being afraid of people copying their work and pirating their work, they should actually say, please, copy it. Pirate this, please. Spread this, please. And most importantly for me, rather than just spreading these messages, was this amazing invitation for people to come in and play, come in and learn about what made this cultural expression happen. And that's the ability that Creative Commons licenses allow for making derivatives. And basically the opportunity that licenses like this and movements like this offered for people to be able to learn, and learning by picking up the car bonnet and looking inside and playing with the things that make cars work, which obviously I don't know much about. But in the same way that we open up cars and take cars apart and put them back together, we could learn how software works, how music is made, and how culture is built. This came from a really deep passion of mine that I saw happening around the world at this time, where people, by sharing their culture on the internet with the rest of the world, rather than having it stolen, they were actually creating, replacing ready-made culture, like this TV dinner, with homegrown culture. So remixing it, being able to have the knowledge to be able to remix Coca-Cola culture and make it our own. Now, 2 years later, this talk today is dedicated to the pioneers, the people that Andrew and I went to 2 years ago, and still go to today with our amazing team that we have here today, and say, and actually said yes, we are going to do this. We're going to share our creativity with the world, as opposed to those who still look at us like we're crazy. So in education, this university, I think, was the first university to license some of its courses under Creative Commons. Cool, which has been succeeded now, but was one of the first pieces of software that was developed under free and open source software. And UWC continues to be a great bastion of free culture in South Africa, along with other universities. The New Media Lab at Rhodes University, an amazing group of young people who said that they would teach Creative Commons as a course at that university. I think one of the first there. Tutong, the National Education Department website. This doesn't often happen in Creative Commons, but this is a portal that Duncan Hendel spoke about earlier, that it's the National Education Department portal, and it allows people to contribute content to the commons, to the South African and the global commons, and people do that under a Creative Commons license. The media has also been instrumental in really growing awareness around Creative Commons in South Africa. The Sunday Times is now the first newspaper in South Africa that I know to license its own content under Creative Commons this week in celebration of this conference and the events associated with it. Gregor, are you going to give a shout out for that? The Mail and Guardian Online, even before that, but licensed their blog website, which enabled bloggers to retain their copyright and to share it with the rest of the world. In the music field, two amazing groups of people, one DJ from Cape Town, Mr. Gelatine, who was using Creative Commons licenses before they even came to South Africa, and interestingly enough, the Johannesburg Philharmonic Orchestra, which was sharing and selling its music still under Creative Commons licenses on a website called Magnatune. DJ Fresh, last year I think it was, who released components of his music under a Creative Commons license, which enabled young people to remix his songs and create something new out of it, all legally. And an interesting story lately where Apple had to withdraw its very draconian license in favor of a Creative Commons license. This was an amazing thing to see happen because bloggers around the country actually noticed that when people submitted podcasts for the competition, they had to basically give away all their copyright forever to Apple, and they couldn't use any licensed materials. And because we've actually built up this amazing community, small but yet really powerful community of people, including bloggers, that actually use Creative Commons licensed work, they said, hold on. They actually read the terms and conditions. They alerted the rest of the blogger community to it. And within about 3 days, Andrew Renz, our Creative Commons lawyer, and myself and a bunch of other bloggers actually got Apple to change their conditions, which is a really, really amazing thing to have happened. And I don't think it's happened anywhere else, so that's really cool. Fourth, in art, Nathaniel Stern, a great South African artist who is persuading other artists to release at least low-res versions of their art online to build their international exposure. Then in the field of authorship, Justin Nurse, who you saw there, it's strange, this is the same man, younger, less jaded, who 2 years ago, in fact, while Larry was here, the judgment came out from the Constitutional Court, which was really important. I think we haven't celebrated enough, in fact, that there is actually space within trademark law for people to remix and create a public space around trademark without infringing on the rights of corporations. And I'm going to tell you a secret now, that 2 years ago, a little bit over not even 2 years ago. I actually went to a meeting of South African IP lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, and I was defending Justin Nurse's claims before the Constitutional Court judgment had come out. And at that stage, every single court in South Africa had rejected the Justin Nurse's claims, and had said that they should stop selling their T-shirts because it was infringing IP, trademark of SAB. And I went to the meeting, and I was bowled over with the harsh reality of what people outside of this room actually think about all these things that we think are very logical, that we think are completely obvious. And they were basically shocked at my communist leanings. And I ended up, this is a very big secret, I ended up going into the bathroom and crying. Now, talking of victories and winning and losing, I feel really proud to stand here and say that we actually did win. I hope I can actually send this video to all of you. That we did win this amazing court case, that it really paved the way for some critical thinking about marking out a public space for us to talk about IP in a way that doesn't just concern big corporations. Lastly, bloggers and podcasters. Joe Blog, a guy from Missing Link, these are amazing people. I went to them and said, you should be using Creative Commons. And they said, Creative Commons, let's use the public domain license that says anyone can take any of our stuff and not even attribute us. So thank you to them. And then lastly, I think this is lastly, the translation crew. There's some of them here today. I think Ian Gilfillan, who's translating Wikipedia projects, is here today. But someone who isn't here today, and something that he wanted to launch here, Dwayne Bailey from translate.org, this week has completed, with the help of the team at iCommons, where I'm based in Johannesburg, 3 translations. Hopefully there'll be more soon, and with your support, I'm sure there will be. But Afrikaans, Zulu, and Southern Sotho have all been translated. All the human readable code of Creative Commons licenses have now been translated into Afrikaans, Zulu, and Sotho. So that's a really amazing thing, and all done with the help of volunteers. Now, been speaking about great things and wonderful people. But there's still a lot of challenges that we see every day. I don't cry about them all the time, but sometimes I do feel like I should be. I think anger has replaced that. I'm yet to reach the stage of acceptance, but a lot of common knowledge, or knowledge that should be in the public domain in South Africa, remains restricted for no obvious reason. I went to some of these government websites, and this is the obvious place to start, because government information is and should be in the public domain, and government should be saying it is in the public domain and marking it very clearly as so. Most of the websites that I went to of government departments, including that of the Department of Arts and Culture, Department of Trade and Industry, and Statistics South Africa, are still under copyright, or at least that's what they say. And we've realized through our work how important it is to say up front what isn't copyrighted, because copyright plays a really important role, but there's a lot that really can be freed up, and a lot of innovation can happen around it. Archives. Who of you have been to the Apartheid Museum or the Constitutional Hill Museum in Johannesburg? Okay. So probably the people from Joburg. So that's about 4 people in this audience, 5 people in this audience. I went to the Constitutional Hill Museum, and it's an amazing museum. There's great things there to see and do. And I wanted to take a photograph of some of the exhibits. Some of these exhibits include placards of of, one in particular was very interesting because it said how many rations black people could have, colored people could have, white people could have in the prison. And I was like, whoa, this is very 18th century. And I wanted to take a picture of it. They said I couldn't. And when I asked why, they said it was because of copyright. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a good place to start. And that's the work that we're trying to do, is to try and get archives, when people actually submit works to an archive, to sign a release, to say people are free to take photographs so that the rest of the 90% of the people in this audience can actually enjoy what is an amazing museum. That educators, that teachers that don't necessarily teach in schools in Johannesburg or in the precinct of Constitutional Hill can take photographs of that, can make websites, can include them in their course materials without fear of being locked up. Lastly, educational resources. There's been amazing work done by people like the Shuttleworth Foundation in particular, and there's some of them here today, with freeing educational resources. But there is a long, long way to go. And I think the money that we're spending in very poor resourced areas on textbooks, where one person in the school has access to a textbook that they share, really can be replaced by something that promises to be a lot more of educational value. And now, so we did our Bible salesman route, and we went to people and we persuaded, and we had a lot of victories. But now we move to a new stage. What we really, really need to start looking at in South Africa is moving to a level where we can investigate commons-based peer production. Now, to explain what commons-based peer production is, I just have to point you to Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia is staffed by about 10 employees, and it has become, in the last few years, the most incredible resource for schools in South Africa, as well as other schools around the world, to read about encyclopedic things, and to learn from this really amazing free resource. Now, we have a lot of talk about giving things away for free. But what I'd like to do next year at this gathering is to talk to you about some amazing examples of where people are actually collaborating, coming together to contribute free resources, to contribute towards a common goal. And South African bloggers, I think, are at the heart of this, and are at the heart of spreading the word around this. We just recently had an experience in the run-up to this event. On Friday evening, we're going to be having a CC Salon, a bring and braai in the South African sense, where people in the last few weeks have been donating content to a common pool, musicians who have been contributing to a resource that will be shared on 1 laptop per child, so OLPCs around the world, to millions of children around the world, and that will also be available to South African schools. And what we did was we asked musicians, authors, poets, to contribute something, to donate something to the commons, but not just to donate it, to actually interrogate what that piece of content, what the value of it is for education. And that was quite an amazing experience for people. Like Nathaniel Stern actually remixed or republished a spoken word poem that he had written years ago, and he posed the question that would be interrogated by a teacher in the class who was playing this spoken word poem and talking about the poetry from South Africa. And he had to ask a question that would be interrogated in the classroom. And through this, we are trying to build not just common resources, but a practice that is really, that the free software movement knows about very well, the practice of peer production. The International Library of African Music is one of those archives that I usually talk about and say how angry I get when I see money going into making work accessible in this incredible resource that's in Grahamstown, tiny little place in Grahamstown that no one ever, or hardly anyone ever visits, where that money that went into making those archives more accessible by digitizing them, why that material isn't available online for others, namely young musicians, to learn about their cultural history, to be able to remix their cultural heritage and actually build things that are truly, truly uniquely South African, to build an economy that's based on our amazing culture. This is the only way that this is going to happen. But last year, my colleagues and I, when we ran a competition, two of the winners are here today, JC Bukenya, and where is he? Now I've forgotten his name. Lucio Ka. He says I must say it like that. Lucio Ka. From Brazil are both the winners of a competition where Brazil and South Africa took samples, traditional samples that were unique to their culture, and we uploaded and we invited musicians around the country to remix those samples and to share them with the rest of the world. And would you like to stand up, please, so people can give you a round of applause? Those are another two pioneers who didn't know us from a bar of soap, just said, okay, I'm going to do this because I want to share my creativity. I want to engage with people from across the waters. And those samples have actually been made available and are available on ccmixter.coza if anyone wants to look. And those two guys will be playing at the CC Salon, which is the after party, the official after party of this event. So I hope you're all there. But that's been a really great success story. Now, the reason why I'm standing out here today is not because I'm a friend of Larry Leslie. I'm a friend of Larry. Kidding. It's because I work with an amazing bunch of people who's sitting in that row there, who are leading an international movement called iCommons. Now, iCommons was incubated by Creative Commons. It's an organization that brings together people like you around the world. So people who are interested in building the free and open source software movement, people who are interested in free culture, open education, access to knowledge. All these people are housed, or we're trying to look at a future in which they share a common goal and a common organizational profile. So iCommons was started by Creative Commons because there was just so many amazing things happening in this global movement, and we knew that we could become stronger by uniting. So iCommons, that's our website. What we do is we incubate projects that share the common goal of growing the commons, so growing information and communication that is available for all to freely copy and share. Here's some of the projects. There's thousands of them, actually, of people around the world. We call them social entrepreneurs who are actually taking these ideas and building businesses out of them, building non-profits out of them, really building on this incredible resource. So we incubate those projects across the world. We are going to be launching a peer production lab where we share these great insights that we have on how peer production can actually work for economies, for education, for culture. And we're also going to be launching a social networking space. Last year in Rio de Janeiro, we launched our first iCommons Summit. These were the people that attended. Many of them was from South Africa. That also had nothing to do with me. But the thing that these people share in common is that they're all builders. They're artists, they're musicians, they are lawyers even. They're cultural producers, and they're all working towards one goal. Now, the thing that I came here to talk to you about is that I'm so proud that this organization is housed in this country, And I think this country was chosen because of its past and because of the opportunities for its future. And these are the amazing people that work at the iCommons office in Johannesburg. We need to do this thing, and Duncan Hindle from the Department of Education spoke about it today. South Africa is a land of opportunity. We don't need money. We need to build human capacity to have more Derek Keatses in every single university in South Africa. We need to really spread this idea and to critically debate it. We need people to be teaching these ideas in schools and in universities. So what can you do? You can donate. And I'm not just talking money, but I'd like some of that too. Donate to the Commons. Think about what you have to share with the world. We are all creators. Think about that. Think about what you can share, and think about the people that you know who really do want to do this. They just don't know about the tools that are available. Volunteer. We are always seeking volunteers, and we want to grow iCommons staff into a staff that really goes out into South Africa and the rest of the world and shows the amazing leadership potential that South Africa has to offer. Third, teach. Tell people about this. Tell people about this idea and get them to donate. And from this moment forward, we shall be launching a SA Free Culture chapter, and I really implore all of you to join. I'm sure that we'll at least can start with the 200 or so people in this room. We do this for many different reasons. I think that we do it because South Africa needs to move away and is very strongly moving away from Coca-Cola culture, replacing the ready-made with the homegrown. This is the website. I encourage all of you to join. Come and party with us. Celebrate the Commons at this event. Thank you very, very much.
The question I wanted to ask earlier, how far can I culture jam? Can I take your image and give you an opinion you don't hold, or associate you with an opinion you don't hold? If I remix the video and suddenly I say that you're now promoting copyright, I'm simply remixing. Your George Bush and Tony Blair thing is the same sort of thing. And what Just a Nurse does in terms of associating brands with opinions they don't have or don't wish to be associated with. Obviously, we're working in a world where you're changing laws for a particular end. You want certain types of information to be free, and that's brilliant, and its pure expression is in things like Wikipedia. But there are people who can abuse those rules. And where they get too grey, that's what I'm asking. How grey do you want it?
Yeah. So a couple parts to respond. One is that there are other principles of law beyond copyright. So fraud is one. So if you say that I said, for example, that Richard Stallman was dead, you'd be lying. If you remixed what I said to make it seem in people's minds that I had said that, you'd be lying. Now, if you remix what I said in a context where people understand it's your remix, not what I'm saying, I have no problem with that. And indeed, one thing that strikes me as interesting is to compare the culture of writers to the culture of musicians and filmmakers. We who write texts experience all the time the reality of reading what we've written reused in context where it's totally misunderstood, where lies are told about us all the time. But the idea that I would think I need to rush to a court and get some court to stop that person from doing it seems to me crazy. Yet when you do that with film or music or somebody's brand, the natural instinct is to say, yeah, we're going to run to court and use a court to stop them from doing it. The difference, in my view, is not whether we should be criticizing people who misuse our work. It's whether we should be using the legal system to criticize people who misuse our work. So I'm happy to say, you misuse my work, you're sloppy or dishonest or fraudulent, but I would never go to a court to say, punish him for misusing my work in this particular way. And I think that's the distinction we have to build upon. Now, I think the Justin Nurse example is a beautiful one. Of course, the brand doesn't like the fact that in some sense it's associated with his work. But nobody's confused about whether the brand, the company itself, actually produced that work. So they don't like the association, but the association is not misleading in the sense that people wonder whether, in fact, the company had produced that particular work. And so when I said I think trademark and brands are great, I meant in the sense that they had, the sense of the original purpose to avoid misleading people. And where the context makes it clear it's just an association, not misleading, then free speech, as the South African court, the only court in the world that's done this so far, used a free speech principle to articulate why, in fact, that exists. So I think there are limits. There are lots of other principles to be invoked. But the thing we need to avoid, the thing we need less of is lawyers. The thing we need more of is argument. And freeing the content to be used for argument and persuasion and avoiding the legal process is all that I'm recommending.
Yeah, I just want to add 2 cents. The amazing thing about this movement and about articulating these ideas is that we don't change the law. We don't have to. And in fact, a lot of people actually say that we're wrong to not be trying to change the law. We're actually using what was enshrined in copyright law and trademark law when it was first established, that there were actually limits to those laws. And that we've actually forgotten that there are limits. And that's what we're trying to re-articulate, to actually show the space, the limits that were originally, if you look at history books, that were originally actually enshrined in those laws.
Hi. I have a question, Heather, which really touches on what you mentioned earlier on public information, because we have been discussing issues related to the creative culture, but obviously public information forms an important part of the creation of that culture. I'm involved in an initiative which is providing free online access to case law for Southern and Eastern Africa, and that is ostensibly public information. But the internet has really turned public information on its head, because now instead of going down to the bowels of a building and digging through dusty old boxes, you can actually get access to this information. So we keep on knocking our heads against 2 issues. The one is one of principle, I believe, and the other is more of a practical issue. The principal issue really touches on this access and availability of information and making it available, but not contravening the rights of an individual to privacy. So specific sensitive cases or cases which might have, I know in the US they tend to, in these judgments, they have social security numbers, addresses, etc., etc. It becomes quite tricky to try and protect the rights of an individual in that kind of situation. So we have that sort of public interest versus privacy argument. And on the other hand, what we have is with these judgments that are coming out of the courts, we've got commercial publishers who have first access to that, who are adding editorial content, publishing this information under a copyright, which then prevents anyone else from copying that information. But it's public information. So is this a debate that the Creative Commons can and is going to enter into? Is there something that we can start, some groundswell of movement we can start to initiate here? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's along with government information, because basically in this country, and we've spoken before, I thought I recognized you, basically with government websites, this is one of our major problems, because our law is actually not owned by us. And basically that's true, because they're commercial publishers that are the only people that actually publish the law in this country. And it's just amazing that there are initiatives like your initiative, because doing really great things. And I mean, we've been looking at this, and I think we really need to look at it, because I'm kind of in my stage of thinking about Creative Commons and marking out the commons. I'm actually starting to think, you know what, we actually have to go back to square one and start looking at what should, and fighting really for what should be the most obvious things that are available. And so I say we should really talk about that, and we will. Thanks.
Hi. That's a bit loud. It's a question really for I think Larry and Heather. Larry, I was really interested to see how you managed to sort of draw upon, I guess, the American libertarian tradition, the Paul Revere picture. And I think that's a really important and a really rich historical vein to draw upon. But it's also very specifically an American vein. And I know Americans do have a tendency to view sort of democracy as very much something that comes from there. But I'm interested to know whether we shouldn't be, when we're talking of culture and we're talking of freedom, whether we shouldn't be somehow trying to draw a similar line with our own sort of rich history and tradition of in fact, mixing culture and freedom. There was a strong movement of cultural workers, for example, in the 1970s and 1980s in South Africa, who were very much involved in culture and freedom. Is there a line to be drawn? Is there a link that we should be making there, or is it a different kind of freedom altogether that we're talking about?
So my hope is that the stories that we tell get translated into as many cultural traditions as possible. And what translation means here is not so much carrying ideas from one into another, but finding cultural reference in each of these different contexts. So I can do nothing more, because of my own limits, than speak from a tradition I know well, but in a way that opens it up for people to make connections that they would make. So you tell me the connection you would draw to the movement that happens in the 70s here in South Africa. Sounds like it's connected directly, but I'm not going to tell you whether it is. This is what I hope this story inspires you to tell others, to find the links and to make the links obvious. So you're right. It is the case that much of what I talk about is American-focused. But it is also the case that America has used its power to force its ideas on other institutions, or use those institutions to pretend like they're universal ideas that it's imposing on the rest of the world. So the United States uses WIPO, and WIPO then says these are ideals of intellectual property that we're going to force you to adopt. And if you don't adopt them, then you're in some sense immoral as a country. So you could talk about this as not being American, but it is ultimately about American power being exerted in this particular way. So I don't apologize for emphasizing the American connection here, just because I think we need to take responsibility for a lot of the harm which we've done in pressing these ideals beyond what was, as I think Heather rightly says, their historically limited and balanced focus.
You know the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to respond to this. Thanks. So the answer is obviously yes, and I support completely what Larry says. The interesting thing is that I visit a lot of countries around the world. I went to Austria last year, and they told me about the story they tell about Creative Commons and how it relates to their culture. They have a commons. They still use it today, actually. They have a commons where anyone can graze their cattle. They also have a fountain that they've actually made open source water, which I'm sure you've seen. A fountain that a little co-op, the community actually owns or runs and manages, and they bottle this water in celebration of the link to their culture. And in many of my other talks, I speak about the Freedom Charter, about the culture of struggle in this country, and how important and how relevant it is to the struggle that we're having now, and how important it is to our future. So I think stories are really important, and I think we all have. And just one last thing, I suppose, about that is that Larry and Jimmy come out very seldom, but there are amazing people in this country that are telling these stories all the time. And it's really important to take a listen to them, because there's been great media attention around Larry and Jimmy, and that's wonderful, and it's really good for us. But there's some really good stories out there about this country and about the great things that are happening in this country without Larry and Jimmy being on the phone to us every day. So I think please just listen to those stories, because they are there.
I work many years with sampling and remixing, and I still have the question. Is it possible to define exactly the difference between remixing, editing, sampling, and remaking? It's possible to define this?
So for 3 years, I was a philosophy student. And during those 3 years, I would have said yes, absolutely, and I would have written hundreds of pages in definition. I've been freed from philosophy. I don't have to think like that anymore. And so I guess I want to say maybe, but I don't think it's important right now to work out the precise definitions. What I think is important is encouraging practices, which people will call different practices. So you know as well as I, there's a history in music in particular of this practice developing. Hip-hop is probably the American example that's most familiar, but it evolves into something people think of as laptop music right now, which is basically taking, my favorite artist here is Girl Talk, who's this amazing biotech guy from Pittsburgh who has on his machine literally thousands of sounds, which in a performance he will mix together to produce music and something as he's actually performing. We could try to draw lines around which you want to call what. The only line I'm concerned about is, when should the law say no? And again, as I said before, I'm happy to concede that there's a plausible argument in a very narrow class of cases where the law should say no. So if you make a movie and somebody can make it available for free on the internet to all the people who might want to see it, then I can understand plausibly why the law might have to say no there. But for all the different genres of remix and sampling and hip-hop and the kind of creativity that's going on there, in my very crude lawyer way of thinking about it, the only question is, should the law say no to that? Is there any good reason to stop that form of creativity? I can't see it. I just don't understand why we allow that form of censorship in the name of property.
So I'm surprised that there hasn't been more talk about compulsory licensing. So a big part of the problem on the internet is if you wanted to license 5 seconds of a Disney movie, you would need to invest 6 months and $20,000 worth of lawyer time to get that license. Maybe they wouldn't charge you that much in the end. And as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I think in the music world, there is a compulsory license for songs. If you want to perform a song by the Beatles, there's a known amount that you have to pay. You don't have to go through a negotiation. You can do a cover of a Beatles song and release it on a CD, and they get paid something. So why hasn't there been more discussion of just compulsory licensing for some commercial remixes and so forth? And would that be good or bad for this remix culture?
Well, the place that there was lots of conversation about compulsory licenses was in the context of peer-to-peer file sharing. And, as an old man, what I do is I like to say, see, we were right. So here's an example where we were right. 10 years ago, where the first proposals were made about compulsory licensing for peer-to-peer file sharing. No government adopted it. So for 10 years, we've had basically growth in peer-to-peer file sharing, artists getting no money from that peer-to-peer file sharing, businesses who otherwise would have invested lots of money in figuring out great new ways to make content didn't do it because they were afraid of the lawsuits that the Napster-like cases produced. The only people who, in theory, were benefited were the record companies who maintained their exclusive right to set the price, but of course they lost anyway. They're being wiped out by this technology. So if instead of that, 10 years ago, we had adopted compulsory licenses, A whole bunch of artists would have money who don't have it right now. Consumers would have had access to music openly without their kids being called criminals. Businesses would have been able to build businesses around this that understood what the lines were clearly. And the record companies, in theory, might have had less power, but probably a lot more money. Right? So, yes, I think compulsory licenses there would have been fantastic and an obvious solution. The problem with remix is you don't want to be issuing licenses where there should be no copyright restriction at all. Right? So in my view, non-commercial remixing should be free, absolutely free, not licensed. If I buy the song, I buy the CD, I should be able to do this type of remixing for free. Maybe if you want to take it commercial, we should be figuring some kind of compulsory out there, maybe. But at least in the initial core, I think it ought to be free. Now, Creative Commons is trying to help us understand what the boundaries ought to be. Not by changing the law. Again, as Heather's absolutely right. We don't try to change law, or at least when I have the Creative Commons hat on, I don't try to change the law. But through voluntary licensing. So we have a structure now where you can say, my work is available for non-commercial purposes. But if you want a commercial right, click here, and I'll take you to some commercial licensing place that will give you a commercial right for it. Or we have a site, CC Mixter, which is this amazing source of remixed music. Increasingly, we're discussing how we can make it so that remixed music, which is now available non-commercially, could be used commercially by clicking through and getting some kind of commercial rights associated with it. That's trying to replicate a simple system that the compulsory license would do, but instead doing it voluntarily rather than through the law being changed. And I guess my view right now is it's better to experiment with the voluntary system for this area for a period of time so we begin to get a sense of what makes sense before the law changes. But with respect to peer-to-peer file sharing, it seemed to me a no-brainer 10 years ago, and now we have data to support it 10 years later.
Well, that brings us to the end. Will you take one more? You seem so desperate to ask the question. Yes. Okay.
Scenario. My mother is folk stories is awesome. And let's say I get her to, I think they can hear me. Let's say I get her to say.
You're wrong.
Okay. Let's say I get my mother to say one of the stories and put them on on iCommons or Creative or whatever. And then somebody else takes that story, that folk story, and puts it in a CD with some background music and sell that. Will the licenses that you guys are putting in place, I don't know anything about Commons, so the licenses that you guys have in place, will they allow, will they force those people to actually have to pay my mother for some of the work that she's done?
Yeah. So CC gives out different free licenses. Everything we give out is for free, but the licenses are different. Most, 2/3 of people, choose a license that has a non-commercial component to it, which means not that they're against commerce, but that if you want to make commercial use, you've got to come back to the author and ask for it. So it says you don't have to ask permission if you're going to make non-commercial use. That's free. But if you want to make commercial use, you've got to ask permission for it. So in your hypothetical, if she released it under a non-commercial license and they want to take this content and sell it and put music behind it, they'd have to get her permission first. Now, again, the debate that I was referring to about people who believe in freedom defined and who believe there are only two licenses, one that says do whatever you want or one that says copy left, part of that debate is about whether non-commercial is a legitimate free license term. And in my view, it is legitimate because what it does is encourage a lot of people to put work out there that they're happy for people to share in all sorts of non-commercial ways without them fearing what I think many of us feel, which is the kind of unfairness of that work being used commercially without us getting any benefit from it at all. So this is a device, the non-commercial device, that encourages sharing because it's providing a protection against a kind of exploitation that at least right now many of us believe is really exploitation.